The International Christian Embassy Jerusalem is your embassy in the heart of Israel, founded in 1980. From our headquarters in Jerusalem through our branches in over 80 nations and yours in Canada, we seek to challenge the Church to take up its scriptural responsibilities, to remind Israel of the promises made to her in the Bible, and to be a source of practical assistance to all the people in the land of Israel. On today's program, a lesson about Israel's history and the restoration of Jews to the land. President Reuven Rivlin delivers a message of blessing at the Feast of Tabernacles. And on our panel talk, the issue of missionizing in Israel.
Hello, I'm Donna Holbrook, National Executive Director of the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem in Canada. I want to tell you about one of my first trips in Israel. I had just returned to our hotel room from the Jerusalem March, wearing my Canadian-Israeli t-shirt and carrying our Canadian flag. An elderly gentleman came over to me and asked me where I was from and why I was in his country. I told him I was from Canada, had just returned from the march, where thousands of other Christians from over 80 nations had marched, and that our group was there to tour Israel. He pressed on with more questions, so I mentioned Yad Vashem and finally declared, "We're here because we love Israel," to which he asked another question. "So why do you love me? Not us, but me." To which I was surprised and answered, "Because God tells me to, and I do with all my heart." That satisfied this gentleman, who then showed me his arm with the concentration camp number tattooed during the Holocaust. He told me that 80 of his family members perished. He then led me by the hand to the area in the foyer where his wife, relative, and friend were sitting, waiting for him. I smiled as he introduced me around, and then I politely said goodbye, only to retreat quickly to my room where I lost it. I cried, and I cried.
Zechariah 12:8. In that day shall the Lord defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and he that is feeble among them at that day shall be as David, and the house of David shall be as God, as the angel of the Lord before them.
Welcome to our panel discussion. Our topic today is the question, missionizing in Israel. Is it a spiritual threat to Israel as warned by the chief rabbis? Joining me today to talk about it, Pastor Adam Gabelli, Ron Hembury, and Donna Holbrook. Now, the topic today was generated by an article that came out that's entitled Chief Rabbis Call Christian Embassy a Spiritual Threat. Yes, the Christian Embassy, the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem. Every year, we have something called the Feast of Tabernacles. Clearly, Jesus, Yeshua, is discussed. Now, to what degree? Because apparently, the chief rabbis aren't too happy about it. So they're calling the ICEJ a spiritual threat to the spirit of Israel. Now, this is a big issue for us, Donna. Take it away. You're our executive director in Canada.
Christine, it's not a new issue. It has come up before. And I remember during the Second Intifada, just after 2001, we were going, when 50% of the Jews were not going to Israel, the Christians were going up. And it always seems to come up around the Feast of Tabernacles because we're known to bring 4,000 to 5,000 each year from the nations, representing about 80 to 100 nations. This is no little thing in our celebration. It's a Christian celebration. And we've been limited. There used to be an ultra-Orthodox mayor, and he tried to limit our 5,000 people down to 500 in this march, and that we had to watch what we said. We couldn't say anything. We couldn't have any kind of signage on our T-shirts. We were scrutinized. And so this has been a problem. But I'll tell you something. It stirs up the opposite effect of what they're trying to do. And the Israelis know we have been not just fair weather friends, we are there during their toughest times. And so they come out in droves. They present little cards that say, "We love you," and they have a little Canadian flag, and they bring us gifts. And so you know the people are responding, and they're pressing in as we're marching up the street. It's a very beautiful thing.
Now, the Feast of Tabernacles is actually dubbed Israel's largest tourism event.
It is.
each
Yes.
year.
Yeah.
Now, Michael Oren, he's the former Israeli ambassador to the United States. He actually stood to the ICEJ's defense, expressing sadness and saying, quote, "I was saddened to read about the public letter of the chief rabbis calling for a boycott of the Christian embassy in Israel." He goes on to say that the Christian embassy has been outstanding in its advocacy and love of Israel. "I've never once encountered," he says, "an instance of proselytizing by its staff. Just when Israel is grappling with the threat of economic sanctions and rising anti-Semitism throughout the world, this is the time to embrace rather than to alienate Israel's Christian friends," unquote.
Well, the Bible makes it clear that Israelis, Jews, are to welcome the world, the nations to Israel during the time of Sukkot, during the time of the feast. So yes, our hearts are grieved, even as a rep for the embassy myself, to hear what the chief rabbinate has said and has made these statements. And of course, we know it's not new, but as a Christian, I believe it is a deception of the enemy to bring division between the church and the state of Israel, which I believe is ultimately God's end-time plan to see us one. You know, but I can confidently say as a representative, and I'm sitting next to our executive, the director of Canada, ICEJ, and say that we don't have any hidden agendas. Our desire is not to proselytize. It is truly to love. And that's what I'm a youth pastor. I teach my young people this all the time. Listen, your job is to love people. And we are doing precisely that with Israel. All of the things that we spearhead in Israel and in the nations of the world as ICEJ is to stand for the state of Israel and advocacy, stand against anti-Semitism, equip the church in knowledge of Israel's place in God's plan for the earth. And, you know, so we're saddened to hear this.
Now, I'm not the one blowing our horn here. It's Michael Oren doing this. He goes on to say that the ICEJ has brought over 120,000 Jews to Israel and run a full care residence for 70 Holocaust survivors in Haifa, which I visited. And it's... Go ahead there.
The truth is that it's, first of all, congratulations. I mean, that's awesome. And the reason I say that is because when people begin to see you as a threat, it means the effect is happening. Right. And the question is, you come back to the Bible where Paul the Apostle says in the book of Romans, he says, you know, I would be willing to spend the rest of my eternity in hell if all of the people of Israel would come to know Jesus like I've known Jesus. So from a standpoint of outside looking in, it's from a Christian point of view, a biblical point of view, a literal biblical point of view, it's actually good. And the thing is that why ICGA is not involved in defending itself from the standpoint legally and all that, it is involved in doing evangelism. And the point is that I'm not going to apologize or I'm not going to feel bad about telling somebody about Jesus Christ.
I'm glad you brought that up, and this is where it gets really sticky, because I have had on a speaking engagement a sweet Jewish lady come up to me and question about missionizing, and she was in tears. She says, you know, we've come out of the Holocaust, we've tried to establish our Jewish state, our Jewish identity, and having Christians come in here and usurp that identity, that is an offense to us as Jews. How do you answer to that? How do you, because I mean, this is a source of conflict even among Christians, because on one side we'll say, you know what, we're just feeding God's sheep, this is what we're required to do, and on the other side as Christians, we tell about the word, and if people convert, they convert. And then you have the harder converters, and that is, it's an ongoing struggle.
Quickly, I was somewhere and I met a rabbi, and a rabbi talked to me, said, come here, I want to talk to you privately, and that was unusual because he was an Orthodox rabbi. And he said, I have to ask you a question. And we were at a place where we were selling vests for the military of Israel so they could protect themselves. He said, why do the Christians always protect the Jews? Why do they do that? Why do they love us? How come they do that? And I said to him, well, I mean, first of all, you know, you're the chosen people of God and all of that stuff. And I began to explain to him what our response was, and he began to cry. And he told me, I can't say, this is years ago, but I can't say who his name was, but he said, don't ever tell anybody that, because underneath the truth is that we do appreciate you. So again, that's interesting. And as we look at this, we have to realize the dynamic tension between evangelizing Jews and working with people. And all we can do is what we are doing and what you're doing.
I'll tell you a little beef I have, and I want to hear Donna's response to this. If you look at Jesus, Yeshua, his real name is. I mean, right now we have a drive that's coming out of the Sabeel Ecumenical Liberation Theology Center that's declaring Jesus a Palestinian, and you've got this other side that's declaring he's a Palestinian just because he was born in that area. Now, the big issue is Jesus was a Jew. He has his heritage. When you look at the Old Testament, the prophecies of him returning, he's coming back in full Jewish tradition. I can't see why it should be that Christianity would even begin to threaten the identity of a leader who's Jewish, with a full Jewish identity.
Well, and that's the thing. You know, our mandate is not to evangelize, although as Christians, we are to spread the good word.
And it's free speech,
and
too.
we're in Muslim countries with the representation of bringing the message of Israel to Muslim nations. That's not an easy thing. The fact is, God loves us all. And we grew out of, actually, a boycott, an Arab boycott. ICEJ was founded when the Knesset proclaimed Jerusalem the undivided eternal capital of the Jewish people.
Yes.
The Arab nations, so under that threat, 13 of the embassies moved from the capital of Israel, is Jerusalem, to Tel Aviv. Now we know that the embassies have to be founded in the capital of any country. Israel's the only place where that is not so. So, but the other thing is, when we look at our mandate is Isaiah 40 verse 1 is to bring comfort to God's people. Our mandate isn't to tell them what to believe, but we want them also to see that we love them with the love of Christ. We are helping them in all areas of their need, with the Haifa home, women off the street, orphanages, bomb shelters. The list goes on. And but they have to understand also that as believers, we also are undergirding Christian Arabs who are believers in the land and Messianic Jews who are in the land.
Yes.
And they shouldn't feel threatened by that.
No.
Right?
No.
Obviously, as a Christian, one of the greatest methods of evangelism is our actions. And just by acting out love, I believe we are showing to whoever it may be, whether they be Israeli Arabs, Palestinians, Druze, Jews themselves, the love of Christ. By giving homes, by providing food, by standing with them, by speaking against hatred. So we are fulfilling the Great Commission, even in that sense, through our actions.
And we're going to have to wrap this up, but I do want to say before we go, and I thank our guests for joining us, that Donna Holbrook, as Executive Director to the ICEJ, no matter what criticism she continues to get about missionizing, when she doesn't do it, she continues to love Israel, continues to support Israel, continues to spread the word about the truth regarding Israel. So on that note, thank you all so much for joining me on this topic. We're going to be back after this.
And then it says, kings shall be your foster fathers and queens your nursing mothers. That Gentile rulers would also be involved in the Jewish return to Israel, just as, say, King Cyrus was in the first return of the Jews from exile. And we have many examples of this in Israel's modern history. Queen Victoria, actually in the mid-1800s, chartered a special fund under the British Crown to help raise money to bring Jews back to the land. The British Crown later endorsed the Balfour Declaration in support of a Jewish homeland here in the land of Israel. There were also several American presidents who were very outspoken in their support for a restoration of the Jews to the land. But when it describes them as foster fathers and nursing mothers. These are unusual relationships, intimate relationships, a surrogate father, a surrogate mother that requires a special sacrificial love. Now, in my own family, we decided years ago when I was young that we would open our home to foster children. The Lord asked us to take some foster children in. These are children who had been abused by their parents. Their parents were alcoholics alcoholics, their parents were dead. For some reason, these were orphans or abandoned or abused children. And as we took them in, it was difficult at first, but over time, when we realized all the strikes that had been against them, how they had just had a hard start to their lives, we started treating them not only as our own family, but even treating them better than we would ourselves. My brothers and I were quite happy if they got the new bicycles instead of us, if they got piano lessons and other music lessons instead of us, that you actually came into this sacrificial love where you wanted them to have better than yourself. And this is what it's talking about in Isaiah 49, that even rulers of nations would prefer the Jews and say, we want to help them even if it costs us. And Gentiles having a sacrificial love to help bring the Jews back to the land. And it's not only helping bring them back to the land physically, but helping them return to God as well. The prophet Isaiah ends this passage by saying Gentiles would not only be involved in the physical return, quite literally, of the Jewish people back to the land, but this would actually help in the spiritual return of the Jews back to their God. That through this Gentile mercy, this Gentile humility and comfort and assistance in helping them return to the land, Isaiah says, you, the Jewish people, shall know that I am the Lord your God. When you see the Gentiles helping you with this, know that this is my hand. So we see that God is not only calling the Jewish people home, but He's also calling out to the Gentiles to be involved in the last days ingathering of the Jewish people. He's out there on the street corner waving to us and saying, be involved in this, it's my hand. And we need to pay attention to this. If we're missing God, it's probably our own fault. And we're running out of excuses if we remain indifferent to the restoration of Israel in our day. But thankfully, millions of Christians have been answering that call to assist in the Aliyah of the Jewish people over recent decades. And here at the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem, we've been helping bring Jews home for the last 25 years. We have assisted more than 115,000 Jews in making the journey home back to Israel. Most of these came from the former Soviet Union when Russian-speaking Jews started flooding home after the fall of communism. The embassy assisted around 10% of the more than 1 million Jews who came home. We've also assisted Ethiopian Jews. In more recent years, we've been helping Jews from Europe escape anti-Semitism and Muslim agitation there. And in our most recent Aliyah operations, we've turned to the east, where there are around 9,000 Israelite descendants in India called the B'nai Menashe. These are people who believe they are descended from the tribe of Manasseh and have been exiled for over 2,700 years, and they believe it's time to come home. We've already been assisting. There's around 2,000 who have made it here to Israel already, but there are still about 7,000 of these B'nai Menashe in northeast India just longing to come home to Zion. And we need your help with this. We want to encourage you to go visit our website and find out more how you can answer that call to help bring these people home in your arms, on your shoulders, to have that love for them that's willing to sacrifice and give to help bring them home, because we know it's the hand of God moving in our day.
Ladies and gentlemen, please would you welcome His Excellency, Mr. Reuven Rivlin, the President of the State of Israel.
Thank you. Thank you once again. Executive Director Jürgen Müller, International Director Joha Ketole, members of Parliament from around the world, distinguished guests, dear friends, dear all of you who came from all over, I welcome you to Jerusalem, the capital of the State of Israel. The capital of those people who worship God. I am a Jerusalemite. I am a Jerusalemite, son of Jerusalemite. I am a Jerusalemite, son of Jerusalemite, son of the son of Jerusalemite. Goes back to the year 1809 when my ancestors decided in Vilnius that it is enough to pray 3 times a day to God. And that was 207 years ago. The prophet Zechariah saw the return to Zion from the exile in Babylon 2,500 years ago. But with just a few Jews returning to Judah, those days were far from glorious. Ezra, the scribe, and Nehemiah, the prophet, both described the challenges, the hardship, and the pain, but also the spirit, the vision, and the determination of those returning to Jerusalem. What an inspiration for generations to come. What an inspiration for the Jewish pioneers of the 19th century, as my ancestors were 2,400 years later, who came to the land of Israel after determining and praying for Zion for 2,000 years. They came home. They came home from Russia, from Poland, from Morocco, from Yemen, from America, from all over. They built farms and villages, determined to make this desert bloom again, leading the return to Zion and paving the way back to Jewish independence in the land of Israel. What an inspiration for 17th century. Pioneers, too, running from operation in Europe, seeking freedom in the New World, and eventually founding one nation under God with liberty and justice for all. Just imagine, my good friends, just imagine how hard life was in Judah 2,500 years ago. Imagine how hard it was and it would have been to imagine back then how the rebuilding of Jerusalem would echo far into the future. Imagine how difficult it would have been back then to appreciate the glory, the magnificence, the significance of the return to Zion, not only for us as Jews, but indeed for all nations. As the prophet Zechariah said, "Sing and rejoice, daughter of Zion. I'm coming and will live among you, said the Lord, and many nations will come to the Lord that day." Yes, Yes, my dear friends, the return to Zion would be not a redemption of the Jewish people alone, but should give hope to all mankind. Indeed, it would change the world. Dear friend, thank you. Thank you for coming up from year to year to worship the King, the God of hosts, to celebrate the fast and to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. And it says, ועלו מדי שנה בשנה להשתחוות למלך צבאות ולחוג את חג הסוכות. Thank you for standing with us. Thank you for standing with us. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they that have thee prospers. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you for joining us today, and be sure to visit our website at www.icejcanada.tv or call us at 1-866-324-9133. 100% of what we receive from you toward a project goes to that designation. Through your contribution to ICEJ Canada, you can participate by giving to Haifa Home for Holocaust Survivors, Women at Risk Red Carpet Project, Operation Life Shield Bomb-Proof Shelters, Shoulder to Shoulder Alias Support, Bet Singer Children's Home, Israel in Crisis, ICEJ Communication Media Fund, Christian Friends of Yad Vashem, Magen David Adam Emergency Services, Canada Israel Young Adult Scholarship, Equip and Teach, Bet Rachel Strauss Inclusive Community, Gift, Estate, and Securities Funds.